Welcome to my review of Blues Journey for all three platforms, Neo Geo CD, AES, and Arcade. And all three versions are pretty much the same, nearly identical. I played through all three versions and I couldn't really tell a difference. So that's why in this review, usually I cover one version of a game, but in this review I'm covering all three versions. Now there is other releases as well. I think it was re-released on the Switch and shit like that, but it's probably just a, emulated version of the original game, if I'm guessing. So it should apply. So originally this game took me around an hour and 38 minutes to beat because I took a really bad path. But as long as you take all the left paths, the game can be beaten pretty easily. I will drop a link to my tutorial in the description as well. But it's pretty much just an action game, platformer. There's not many of them on the Neo Geo, so it does stand out for that reason. But it doesn't stand out for many other reasons. It's really not a standout kind of game, but it's not bad. It's decent. A lot of the times what you're doing on the boss fights is you're, stunning the minions and then grabbing them and throwing them at the boss. You can also attack the boss normally by throwing shit at it. And you can stun certain enemies, I think, by jumping on them too, but I never really attacked like that. The game has very forgiving checkpoints. It has multiple paths, as you can see. So there's different levels and bosses depending on the path. Aside from the final boss is always the same, I believe. But the game basically during the stages is mostly very forgiving with the checkpoints. Though there is some shit that feels a little cheap with some of the platforms that doesn't make a lot of sense. But for the most part, the platforming is pretty solid. And the game is super forgiving with checkpoints, meaning you can kind of just bullshit your way through the game if you're not doing a one-credit run. So as long as you're willing to keep putting in more credits, you can bust through most of the platforming. There's a few sections where you do have to actually learn the sections, but they're short sections. And for all the bosses, you do have to beat all the bosses on one life, so you will have to learn the boss fights. So that's, so overall the game is pretty easy, especially if you follow my tutorial with the correct path. Some of the bosses don't have minions, and you'll be dodging patterns as you see here. There's also some cheap tricks you can do on some of the bosses, like some exploits that I found that make them a lot easier. But yeah, pretty much what you see, this is the gameplay. You do some platforming, you kill shit, you throw it. There's a lot of action on screen. For this boss, this is one of the bosses that you can really exploit by taking a hit and then getting right in this position here and mashing the button until it's dead. So some of them, you can trivialize like that. There's also mini bosses. This one I kind of just bullshit my way through. Because the game, it's pretty damn forgiving overall. But the bosses you do have to learn. But the mini boss, I just kill him and die at the same time usually. And that's usually good enough. I never really learned how to fight the guy. I pretty much do that all the time whenever I fight him. I went through all three versions of the game. This is the hardest platforming section of the game. I usually try to show the more difficult sections in my reviews to give you an idea of what to expect. So this is about as hard as the platforming is going to get. It's really not that bad. But it's a little challenging, a little tricky. But yeah, it's a pretty solid game overall. The layouts are not great. I mean, this game would be kind of like a, maybe a mid-level, like Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo platformer, It would be somewhere in that range. It wouldn't be on the level of the better platforming games. But it's a decent game. And it stands out for the Neo Geo just because Neo Geo doesn't have a lot of platformers. And it's definitely better than some of the other platformers I played on the system. So it's not at the lowest tier of platformers. It's a decent quality game. It plays pretty well. This part is cheap. I never understood how to get past this part aside from getting hit by the fireball to get boosted to the platform because I can't jump far enough for some reason. So that's pretty shitty design, I think. I don't really understand that part. But not many actual standout issues. It's just that the game just doesn't stand out as being especially good in any area. But it's solid enough. So I'll show some of the end game sections. Now, there is a swimming stage that's, you do have some swimming in the regular stages sometimes, but a lot of it is pretty optional. But this is actually a swimming stage, so it does mix it up a little bit with that. Though the control for swimming is definitely a little bit worse than it is when you're running around. You also have a button to turn small, as you saw. And you can turn small or large as needed. When you're small, I don't think you can attack at all, though. So it's really mainly used to just get through small areas or for some platforming. I may have used it once in my playthroughs. But yeah, very forgiving checkpoint section. Checkpoint system most of the time. You get checkpoints pretty damn frequently for the most part. It's really, the main challenge is going to come from learning the bosses, and none of them are really that hard. Unless you take the wrong path. So this is the fly boss. And I may also show the glitched way to take him out too that I found, but this is probably the hardest boss in the left path anyway. The path that I used to beat the game. But, with the way I learned to fight him here, it's really not that hard at all. But it can be tricky. You can also make wrong decisions in some of the dialogue choices that may potentially end the game. I never fucked it up. So I don't know if the game ends if you make the wrong choice. But the final boss asks you a lot of stupid fucking questions. But if you pick the top answers, you'll be fine. You'll beat the game. So this is the final boss. And it's not a bad fight. Basically just stop those things from spinning and throw them at the boss. So pretty basic. Definitely not the hardest boss in the game. But yeah, overall, it's a good, solid game. I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. I think it's pretty decent. It's not, it's not in the upper levels for me, but I think it's a decent platformer that's worth checking out on the system. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.